Hi, this is Paul. What this is a conversation between myself and Rick Repetti. Now, it's a little bit different because we had a fairly significant part where I intended to just keep it private between us, where we could get a chance to get to know each other and not have the presence of a camera where I could share some stories that maybe I don't share on my YouTube channel, and he could do the same just so we could build a little bit of rapport. I always feel a little nervous when I make commentaries about things that other people do on the internet, which of course I do, as any of you who watch my channel know, especially when I make commentaries on when people are telling their stories, because it's really a danger that I might misrepresent them, that I might get things wrong, and that they might be hurt by my commentary or my observations on their stories, because our stories are precious to us. That didn't happen at all for Rick. He's had, I think, 4 or so conversations with John Vervaeke. Rick very graciously reached out to me, and we were able to talk, and we had a wonderful conversation. But not all of you probably have seen much of his conversations with John. So I am going to begin this with a segment from his conversation with John Vervaeke, where he goes through some of his story. Now, he'll go through another aspect of his story when we talk, but I thought that including that segment of his conversation with John would be helpful for understanding what we had to talk about and the subject that we talked about with respect to the relationship between institutions and spirituality. So I will begin with this segment of his conversation with John Vervaeke, and then we will go right into our conversation. And I thought it was quite a moving and a real wonderful experience talking to Rick, and I hope we get a chance to talk again. And I'm anxious to share it, and I'm curious to hear what all of you have to say about it. So leave a comment, and thank you for your time and attention.
10,000 things I want to talk to you about after what
Okay.
after
That's why I said an hour and 15 minutes might not happen,
well,
John.
maybe we'll have, well, I'm
Have
hoping.
me back another time.
Yeah, I'm really hoping for that. I'm really hoping for that. So I guess the one thing I want to start in on is, I mean, well, you've seen the series and I do work on it. I mean, you had what I would call a higher state of consciousness that led to a transformative experience. You have this experience, it's of the really real, it's more real than somehow your everyday existence, and you transform your life, right? You transform your life, you take up philosophy, you do and you build and you reorient to come into right relationship with that, which is exactly what that's what a transformative experience is. And so, first of all, being able to talk to somebody with your astuteness about this directly is very exciting to me. Did you have like a single experience, or did you have several of these experiences that were like that?
Multiple. It got to the point where, yeah, I mean, I was meditating like 4 hours a day. I would sit in meditation sometimes and be gone, like samadhi, kind of disappear,
Yeah.
and come back, and thought it was 10 minutes or something, and it was 4 hours, this
Yes,
kind of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I was maintaining consciousness sometimes through falling asleep, this lucid thread of awareness that I'd go to sleep, I'd be in these altered states all night, lucid dreaming, kind of out of body astral travel-y, kind of very, like some of those, just to me, I know the terminology of lucid dreaming is when you know that you're dreaming without waking up.
Yeah.
That's the standard interpretation. But I would like to have another word, and I don't want to just use the same word because everybody takes that word to mean that. But there have been dreams that are so real and so lucid in the ordinary sense of lucid.
Yeah. Yes.
Brilliant, clear, like what's that word? Ontonormative that you use.
Right.
They have such a reality to them that they seem more real than the waking state. I've had a lot of those, and I call them lucid because I don't know what else to call them. But
no, I understand.
Like lucid 1 and lucid 2. But I've had a lot of precognitive dreams, like really, like I think I mentioned, multiply precognitive dreams. I've had those kind of transcendent samadhi-like experiences.
Yes.
I have all kinds of, weird psychic phenomena, senses of telepathy, seeing people's energy, almost like psychedelic experiences. you know,
Yes, yes,
but
yes.
but when once I started doing this, I stopped taking drugs and all that. You know, I did acid and stuff like that,
Yeah, yeah.
and peyote and all that. In the first, I did do that. Actually, I should say that there was a short period after I got into meditation where I was still doing that stuff.
Right, right.
But then at a certain point, I just, I flipped and said, "Nah, I got to stop doing that. This is better." What was one of my meditation teachers quoted some Indian guru who said something like, "Drugs are like plastic grapes and God is the wine," or something like that. And like, you hear these phrases and that just something clicks. And I thought, yeah, and then Ram Dass's guru. Ram Dass was one of my teachers, by the way. I
Oh,
studied with him.
wow. Wow.
Because he was a part of my Sangha for a few years in New York City. That group, that first teacher that I found, maybe 6 months, 6 months into my going to her weekly meditations, I finally talked my best friend into coming, Barry, real hippie, acid freak kind of guy at the time. I finally talked him into coming after he read, Be Here Now, because I carried that book around like it was my Bible. The first time he came, Hilda wasn't there. Ram Dass was there in her place. He's like, "Oh, Hilda's not feeling well. She asked me to, substitute for her." And Barry was like, "Oh my God, this must be the right place, because we got Ram Dass." So, but Ram Dass, and after a short period of time of being in the group, there were all these little private group meditations going on, the splinters, that private little sanghas, and in one of the teacher's basement for like the elite followers or whatever. We jokingly called them the God Squad. But I wound up getting right into all that in a short period of time. And I had Hilda, Ram Dass, and another woman named Joya, who was very, very spiritually advanced person. She was like a walking ball of psychic energy, or what do you call it? Shakti or chi, or, depending on your tradition. I lost my train of thought. I forgot what question I was answering. Did I have just one? No, it got to the point where 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I was in an altered, mystical kind of state.
Right.
For a few years. And it got so bad. I mean, I was in my late teens at that point. And then what happened, this is this interesting thing, because you'll like this story. Ram Dass had been with the group for a few years, and he had a falling out with the other two teachers, particularly with Joya, who, according to Ram Dass, wanted to induct him into tantric training.
Oh, I see.
And Ram Dass felt like he was sincere about it, because he's gay, and he thought he's always been uncertain about his sexuality, and he thought maybe this would be good for him. And he tried it, but he thought that she was more human than tantric in the experience. I'm paraphrasing what he wrote about this publicly.
Wow.
When he left, he wrote an article called "Egg on My Beard" or something, because he felt bad because he brought all of his students to Joya and Hilda, and then he left. When he left, the other two teachers were pointing the finger at each other, and Hilda said, yeah, it's Joya. She's kind of like, she got the power too quickly. She's kind of like Darth Vader or something, too much power, not without spiritual evolution enough, her ego is still there. And so they were all pointing fingers, and they separated. And to me, I was with them for a few years. My life had been radically transformed. I mean, I really felt like one of the apostles with Jesus.
Wow.
For years. And then as if there were three Jesuses, and they got a divorce.
Oh boy.
It was horrifying. And I didn't know what to do. And I kept wanting to be with all three of them. Ram Dass stopped being a teacher. He would give an occasional lecture in a public forum, and I would go to that. But I kept going to Joya's meetings, her separate little meetings, her Sangha, satsang, we call it back in the Hindu name is satsang. The community of Satya is truth, the community of truth seekers. So, and I kept going to Hilda's, but then Hilda didn't want me to go, because I was one of her close people, and like there was no love lost between them, and they were, well, Hilda was vilifying Joya. Joya was not vilifying anybody. But so I was like that kid who's like, I'm not going to decide between my parents. But then Hilda at one point challenged me and said, look, if you keep going to Joya's, you can't come to the private meetings. You could only come to the open one at the church once a week. So I went there a few times, but after a while, I just didn't like that whole scene. And it was a horrific loss of support for me. And even though ideologically and philosophically, I've always revolted against this idea that I read mostly in these, contemplative traditions, that you need a community. Because I had such a bad experience with community, I resisted that narrative whenever I come across it. But on reflection, just recently thinking about it and having a discussion with someone else like you just the other day, I realized that I went through, which I didn't mention yet, I went through a kind of dark night of the soul, really negative, supernaturalistic, psychic, mystical experiences after I lost the connection with the satsang, with the Sangha.
Sounded very traumatizing.
Yeah. And I was in my late teens, I don't know, 18, something, 19, I forget the exact age, but I had all that. It was like I was completely psychically open, like my chakras were wide open. I was very sensitive, but I had no supports.
Right.
And so all of a sudden I was having all these negative spiritual experiences. And it really felt like I was waiting for myself to have stigmata or something. Like I felt like I was being attacked, because I just didn't have, prior to them splitting up, I was in a Garden of Eden kind of state.
Right, right.
All the time. I was so in the flow, everything was so natural and connected. And then it just became very alienated. And I had a lot of weird overnight dreams. I felt like I was battling demons and everything. It just got too freaky for me. And I had some symbolic moments, like I had this one dream that was lucid, I wasn't awake, but it was actually my lucid dreams are almost both senses of lucid in that period, because I would be awake. I would be awake. I would be conscious during the dream. And I knew that it was an altered reality. I knew I wasn't in the waking world. So it was lucid. But it was so normal for me that it didn't hit me like, oh, I'm in a lucid dream. It was all the time for me. Yeah. But many of them were so lucid, they were lucid in that second sense of more real than real. And in one of them, I was climbing up this tower, this wooden shaft, very high, and I knew that it represented my spiritual ascension. And the higher I went, the thinner it got. It was wood, and it was being blown about by the wind, and it was rickety. And the higher I went, the more dangerous it was. And I was almost at the top. And I knew if I went any further, the whole thing would collapse. And so I just turned around and went back down. And after that dream and a couple of other things like that, I had a whole bunch of these kind of, noetic, omen-like insights that let me know I was playing with something that I was not equipped to play with. I did not have the right skills. I didn't have the right development. So I decided, I had a bunch of clues like on what I could do. And I remember, what's his name? Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda's teacher in the 1800s. I don't know if the Vedantist.
Yep.
I remember him. I remember reading that he smoked cigars or cigarettes or pipes or whatever to keep him in his body. Right. That was one clue. And somebody else, some Buddhist, shaman guy told his student that you need to eat meat or something because, you're too imbalanced or whatever. And, so there was a bunch of these clues, and I just decided I did this intense sadhana, spiritual work that brought all this on, opened me up. I've got to do like a reverse sadhana.
Right.
To shut it down. And that's what I did. So I started smoking, and everything I gave up, I brought back. And then there was another period of my life where I started doing everything again. Right. And that was fun. It was like being born again in the flesh rather than born again in the spirit. It was like going from a black and white world into a colorful world. Like I had ignored what in the two worlds ontology, I was not in the lower world for years. But I was happy to come back to that world. And then all I kept was my yoga practice, my mantras, 2 mantras that I've been doing. One is like the Jesus prayer, or from the church fathers, Kyrie eleison, and Om Mani Padme Hum, the Tibetan daily mantra. Ram Dass had taught me that, like he initiated me in that, and gave me a mala and all this kind of stuff, and put me into samadhi. I had a phenomenal experience, just me and Ram Dass once. But like I kept what I thought would sustain me, because I knew I needed to keep my spiritual practice. But what would shut down the chakras and all that, whatever all that other stuff was, I just tried to avoid anything that would, like certain kinds of pranayama practices, like chi cultivating practice. I eliminated all of that. I just kept a simple mantra, which I could do throughout the day, while I'm jogging or whatever, doing anything, and my mindfulness thing, which guess who taught me that? He was a member of that same group, Danny Goldman.
Oh, wow. You've known a lot of the stars, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, Danny's name back then was Jagannath Das. He was one of, him and Ram Dass had the same guru, the little old man in India, Maharaji, named Crowley Baba.
Oh.
So Danny was in our satsang back then, and he taught me mindfulness. So I thought, yeah, that's kind of clean and simple. And there are places where you could go, like insight meditation, whatever, where it's just, there's no guru thing involved. I was averse to gurus.
I can see why.
And anything Hindu, theosophical, anything that sounded like that, I just avoided it. I wanted something like Zen, but I didn't know any Zen, other than just, whatever I could do on my own, Zazen or whatever, but I didn't have any teachers, but I knew how to do Vipassana. And so I've been doing that for decades as my primary practice, and yoga.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, when you were doing it, you reminded me of Hessa's Siddhartha.
Yes.
Very much, except you lived it.
No, I was going to say that, but I don't know if you would remember that scene, that part of his life where he stops being a samana and becomes a worldly guy. Yeah, that image I got from him about color coming back.
Right, exactly.
In this world, in world one.
That was one of the two books that really opened me up in my late teens.
Me too.
So do you still have do you still have mystical experiences or transformative experiences, or are you in a place where that's no longer something you seek or that comes to you? Or so what's like usually people do this and then they go down and then they learn to sort of do this, integrate. Where are you at with respect to that?
Yeah, I've been reluctant to open any of those floodgates.
I can imagine.
Ever since that happened. So I have a good practice. When I'm more steady in my practice, my practice goes up and down.
Of course.
But I do yoga virtually every day, and I do various different kinds of little meditative things every day. And if you've been a multiple decades practitioner, meditation infuses a lot of your life.
Of course.
When you're washing dishes or what, so many different, but I also sit and, but when my sitting practice gets a little deeper, I go deeper. But even if I'm only sitting for 20 minutes sometimes, or a half hour or 40 minutes or whatever, I'll go in the zone where it's a Gnostic place, where my philosophical concerns don't matter to me at all.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing. I know. And when I come out of it, I'm like, I feel great. I feel connected. But then this skeptical philosopher addiction of mine comes back, and I'm like, okay, how could I, how do I integrate that? So that's why I'm writing all the stuff that I'm writing, because I'm hoping that just by keep delving into this and talking to other people like you, and that this will grow. But I do believe that I'm moving back. I'm starting to feel confident and mature enough that, okay, I was a kid. I had a libido, I had an ego, I had all kinds of stuff that I didn't know about, like that you say, like 99% of what we do is not consciously calculated. But like I feel kind of grounded enough to where I'm not so worried about that anymore. But I'm very busy, so I don't have time to meditate 4 hours a day. But I am moving in that direction.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm glad, Rick. First of all, I'm really glad to have met you, and I hope this is an ongoing thing.
Oh, so do I. Listen
Yeah.
to me. After hearing all the things, not just the series of the 50 lectures, but a couple of these voices with Vervaeke. Just yesterday, I listened to something that published, I think, the day before, but it was recorded in September. The Four Horsemen of Meaning.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah.
was awesome. Yeah, everything I listened to you that you're on, I'm like, wow, I wish I would have known this guy, when I was in grad school, so
Oh,
my trajectory would have been, I would have been more equipped, I think, to deal with the issues that I'm struggling with. But it's never too late. But I even think that it might be the case. Like, I don't know, when you talk about providence and things like that, like, I'm very skeptical of this mantra almost. It's like a proverb. Everything happens for a reason, like I ripped that thing apart with Occam's razor and error theories, and like,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
no way you could possibly calculate that or, test that or anything. So like, it's like useless. But sometimes there are other ways of understanding the same thing. Like, it maybe even if it's just, well, it worked out for the best, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
that's naturalistic. It worked out for the best. Okay, let's go with that minimalistic version of it. But like, me struggling and going through analytic philosophy, going to it because of that vision that said you need to study philosophy, not getting what I need, but becoming such a skeptic and an empiricist and everything, that made me challenge, like, I really doubt my incredibly Gnostic, noetic experiences. I'm
Yes.
capable of doubting them from a rational perspective,
Yes.
better than anybody else. I can, I ask people, I'll tell them, this is what happened to me, debunk it, right? But I could do it, like this.
Yeah.
But I think, like, that was good because, like, you want to reverse engineer enlightenment, right? If I can address the skeptic in my own head to my own satisfaction about the validity of my experiences, then I've done great work in my life.
Yeah.
If I could share that with others.
Yeah.
So I think my struggle, my existential, philosophical, psychological, spiritual struggle is a good one.
Yeah. I think that is extremely well said, and extremely pertinent. Oh, okay. There's a thread I want to pick up. There's so much I want to ask you. Now, you said this because I had a somewhat similar experience. I break out of fundamentalism. I start doing all this stuff, and I'm in the depths of the meaning crisis and all this stuff. My own personal version of it. And I get to university and I encounter the figure of Socrates, reading the Republic, and I have some of my first mystical experiences. I remember having. I was sitting in bed and I was meditating, and I don't know what to call it. It was both a visionary experience, a mystical experience of the Platonic forms. And it was like, and it just sort of hit me like this. And it was very much, right. And for me, it's become like a touchstone, phenomenological touchstone taste, because, and you spoke it too. You get to this place that is transconceptual, yet nevertheless completely impregnated with intelligibility in a way that's, exactly. And
it's amazing.
How the Platonic stuff somehow is very good vocabulary for trying to talk about this. This is what I've been trying to articulate, and I think in a clumsy fashion in many ways, because people will do the same thing to me. It's like, what? You're some kind of Neoplatonist, but you're a committed scientist. Like, what's going on? How does that work? And trying to work that out very much.
Episodes with John that caught your eye, and we could talk about that, because I was kind of interested in some of the things that you said about my experience from your perspective.
Yeah.
Now I have a little bit more understanding of your perspective, but not all of it felt like it really captured me, the frames, so I thought we could have a discussion about that. But also, I saw that you recently, you posted something about the free will discussion that I had with John recently. So we could talk about that. We could talk about anything. I'm open. Those are the two things I know that you have interest in me. So I thought we could talk about either of those or anything else. I'm just happy to talk with you. So.
Well, why don't we talk, and this will very much bear on some of John's project and even some of my project, because part of what I've been trying to support is better conversations, both for people who are sort of leaving church and for people who are curious about church. And part of, and please correct anything that if I misrepresented you in any of my commentary, I'd love to be corrected.
I didn't take it that way at all.
Okay.
I'm very open to the possibility that my hearing new interpretations of my experience might be insightful and helpful.
Okay. But the whole question of institutions and structures with respect to and even what word shall we use? I mean, spirituality. It's such a
Yeah, I know.
but and especially one of the things that in re-listening to your talk with John, I thought a lot about Paul's letter to the Corinthian church.
Remind me of the content of that letter. It's been a long time since
So
I read.
Corinth is right in the middle of Greece, and so in order to everything in the Mediterranean goes to Rome, and so basically Corinth is a way that you could bring your grain up from Egypt up the coast and then go to Corinth, and then you take it off the ship and it goes just a little ways, you put it on another ship and then go to Rome. So Corinth was destroyed by the Romans and then rebuilt, sort of like New Orleans. You're always going to have a city there. And it became, I don't know, a major temple to Aphrodite, became a major, could have been something like the Vegas of, that part of the Mediterranean. And a church grew in Corinth, and it became a wealthy, probably not wealthy on Roman standards, but wealthy on church standards in terms of the very, very early church. Also, all the biggest names would go through there. Peter went through there. Paul went through there. Apollo went through there. Everyone who was anybody preaching went through there, and they had, and they boasted of the best spiritual experiences in the church anywhere. They were the most spiritual church. So, the analogies don't probably work, but something along the lines of, the biggest Pentecostal churches, that would be sort of like Redding in California. This whole other world there. But, so they boasted of that. And Paul writes to them and basically says, I've had my spiritual experiences make yours look dull. And he talks about that. But what Paul sort of double downs on that letter is, number one, the cross of Christ, that's really at the center of Christianity. But then also in that letter, you get the formation of what will become the Eucharist in Christianity, because there's a lot of speculation about what that was like early on, but that was just sort of whenever they broke bread, that would be their communal meal celebration. But Paul goes after them because, of course, the wealthy people in the church would be feasting and drinking and getting drunk, and the slaves would have to, make the whole thing work. And Paul just excoriates them and says it'd be better if you didn't mention the name of Christ at all during your feast, the way you're handling it. And so part of it in Christianity, there's always been this tension between the charismatic, the ecstatic, the participatory, what we might call the spiritual experience, versus the institutional, the religio, the binding, intentionally turning some wine to water for the sake of the rest. So, and I listened to your talk, and you talked about, you obviously you were together with the best teachers. You had amazing spiritual experiences. I mean, it seemed to me, listening to you, like very quickly and very early in life, you were sort of opened the doors and in a sense given the keys to the kingdom. And then you went all the way to the top and realized, I'm not ready for this. This doesn't fit me or the story of my life or where I'm at right now. But then at the same time, your community went away, and then you sort of reverse and you go in a different direction. So,
Yeah.
so where for you does community and or institution fit in your thinking of what it means to not simply be a carbon trousered ape?
Really good question. Yeah, I'm not sure, Paul, to be totally honest with you. Like, I grew up Catholic, and I don't remember exactly what changed. It was a very slow and gradual process over the years of me not trusting the Catholic Church. Um, it might have had to do with just the representatives of that church being mean spirited and you know all kinds of weird encounters that I had with them when I was little. I think maybe I was in the first grade when we had some kind of sacrament. I don't know if it was an official sacrament. I just don't remember because I was really young. Where we were supposed to come, we were given these little scapulas, which is like a string around your neck with a little, some kind of icon thing inside a little plastic holder of a saint or an angel. I don't remember. It was some religious, weird Latin looking thing, and we were supposed to come back on Saturday. School was Monday to Friday, and have it blessed. And my school was like 2 miles away. I used to take a public bus, but I was a first grader, and my older sisters went to the school, so I would go with them because I was too young to be on the bus by myself. But I couldn't go by myself on Saturday, and my father didn't want to go. He had a hangover, and I didn't understand that when I was that age. But he just told me I can't take you or whatever. And so on Monday, my teacher, who was a nun, asked me, where were you? And I said, my father said I couldn't go. And she slapped me in the face. This kind of thing. Those were the nuns, right? So I
Yeah.
had that, and they would beat kids and everything.
Yeah.
The corporal punishment was totally normal and
Yeah.
everything. But then there was also all kinds of weird judgments about sin, and they treated us like we were dirty, and it was just like a whole negative experience.
Yeah.
Um, Being around that. And then, you hear these great gospel things in church and everything. And it was just like a kind of total disconnect. And I also remember arguing with them. So I was like a natural born philosopher as a little kid. I remember hearing in catechism class or whatever it was called, religious class, we had regular subjects, but we also had the religion. This story about baptism that, I'll never forget this story. Two babies both die at the beach, one bay apart. One of them is fortunate, they're not Christians, one of them is fortunate that somebody comes over and baptizes them, right? That baby gets to go to heaven. The other baby goes to limbo. Limbo is some kind of weird neutral place where you can never be with God or anything else happy or good. There's purgatory, there's hell. And I remember thinking, didn't you say God knows everything? God's everywhere. God's good. He knew everything beforehand, not a hair, a leaf or whatever. He knows about that. Babies are innocent. That doesn't make sense. And I don't remember the answer, but it was some kind of because mommy loves cream cheese. It was one of those non-explanations that, but I had a lot of those kinds of things. I picked up early on that wasn't really encouraged in that space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had all that kind of thing going on, and I held on to the belief in God and in Jesus and all of that. And when I was a teenager, I just wasn't that serious about going. I stopped going to church
Yeah.
religiously.
Yeah.
Religiously. I think well, we moved from Queens, which is one of the boroughs in New York City, like Brooklyn, when I was 13. And I had always gone to church there. But when we moved to Brooklyn, I went for a while to a new church. I didn't really connect with the one nearby. And it was called Holy Ghost. And then they changed it to Holy Spirit. I thought that was, what is that about? It was one change after another, like, oh, now you can eat meat on Fridays or whatever, like the Vatican II. They stopped doing the Mass in Latin, and that kind of mysterious thing. I enjoyed that. And then when that was gone, it felt secular or something. And like, so all these different things, and eventually it kind of just faded out of my worldview. Although I still believed in God and in Jesus, but then when that yoga thing happened to me, it opened me up into a larger, I forgot the question I'm answering right now.
No, you're doing great.
Yeah, I just don't remember what the question was because I don't want to go too far in one direction. I don't even remember what your question was.
I don't remember what it was either, but it was a good
It was
story.
something about, what do I think about church or institution?
Yeah, that's where we're going.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then it was also the hippie era. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a little older than I look. I'm 64.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I guess I'm younger than I look. I'm only 58. How old am I? Yeah, I'm 59. No, I'll be 59
Okay,
this year. I'm 58.
so I'm 6 years older than you. So then when we grew up, well, I
Yeah,
grew up in the tail end of the 60s era.
yeah.
So there was pot smoking and LSD and all that hip stuff, and that was just kind of like cultural osmosis and all the rock music and all the lyrics, Imagine There's No Heaven, all that, that all came in. And that's around the same time that I found yoga and meditation. So, and that kind of opened up like, oh, it's not just Jesus, it's Buddha and Krishna and all that other stuff. And that's what happens with people that's that claim. I remember reading people complain, Christians pretty much complaining about yoga. It's not so secular, it's a kind of gateway into other religions and mysticism and all this. And my first reaction was, oh, now don't be so paranoid. But the truth is, it really is. It really is. It's a kind of stealth, Hinduism or something like that. So, and that happened to me, and I got drawn into all that stuff, and I managed to find really powerful, charismatic, sage-like teachers. And there were the first time I went to one of the meditation meetings, the very first one I went to, my teacher's name was Hilda. She wore a sari. She was older. She looked like Glenda from The Wizard of Oz. Spoke like that. Yeah, I'm not exaggerating. And the mythos around her was that she lived for like 20 years with all these evolved beings and recognizable big shot names in yoga in India and whatnot. And there were like hundreds of people in this church basement in Greenwich Village. And they were singing songs, waiting for her to come in. And there was all this devotion and love and beautiful hippie looking people. And I just felt like, wow, this is kind of like, I resonated with this. And then when she came in, there was hundreds of people there, and she was walking down the middle of the aisle, and I was right near the middle of the aisle. And she stopped and looked me up and down, and I just felt this tremendous love and something. It was just something transhuman or something. I had never felt that with the priests or the nuns. Well, except once. I remember when I was a choir boy singing "Oh Holy Night" on Christmas Eve once, one of the nuns looked at me like as if she saw something coming through me, like I touched her. I could tell by looking at her that like I brought tears to her eyes.
Yeah.
Because I was just some innocent little kid who got pulled up into the spirit of that. I might have been like 7 or something. In any event, so that was like a church. It was in a church basement, and there were Christian songs being sung, folk music, and then Hindu chanting and all that. And so that became, but then like the fast forward, that whole thing came tumbling down. So 4 or 5 years later, when the teachers split, there were three of them. Hilda was the main teacher. After a while, I realized there was two other teachers connected with her, Ram Dass and this other woman named Joya, or her later name was Ma Jaya. Yeah, they split up. So then I became kind of allergic to any kind of spiritual groups. I became suspicious of any kind of guru type, preacher, leader, you name it. That was a kind of angry, fearful reaction, I suppose.
How old were you in that phase?
About 19,
Okay, yeah.
18, 19.
Rebelling against the rebels.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny, but it's true. And, I had a kind of born again in the flesh thing. One of my interpretations of myself that I thought was a little bit different from yours was that wasn't a failure. It was an organismic, important thing for me to do. Like I had been in this upper register for too long.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like floating around. I felt like a character in a supernatural movie or something. I just was completely disconnected. And I just felt like I needed to reverse course.
Yep.
One of the other things I wanted to tell you about, I hope that noise isn't too loud.
It's all right. Don't worry about it.
Was I remember you caught my use of the word skill. When I described this to John, I said part of my realization was that I didn't have the skills
to
do that. And I remember you talking about it in a kind of Protestant way about it's not about skill, my friend. It's about grace, And so, yes and no, I kind of agree and partly disagree because well, your practices do sustain you and they're important and they ground you and all that kind of stuff. But I knew that I needed to retreat for a whole bunch of different reasons. And saying I didn't have enough skill was probably not the best description.
It's a hard thing to figure out how to talk about. So
yeah,
you're right. You're right.
It's a difficult topic, but and so for the longest time, I mean, my teachers, even though I lost faith in them on one level, I still respected them and loved them almost like a puppy whose master beats him. He still loves the master, They never abused me or anything like that, but I love these three people. They're all gone now, but it just I couldn't outsource my moral or spiritual compass to anyone anymore. That's how I felt. Like I need to take my path into my own hands. And like they never charged anybody for yoga, meditation, any of that stuff. And so for years I had this purist attitude that I would never pay to go and take a yoga class or any kind of course. Like that's fake, The priests don't charge. They pass the bucket around. You can put money in there. That's the Indian way too. And that like in almost every real religion, you don't pay, you donate, voluntarily. So, and I had that attitude. So I stayed away from almost I didn't want to go anywhere where there was some guru or an ashram or anything. And I also didn't want to go and take classes or anything like that. So I was kind of on my own for many, many years. But I realized only recently, just pretty much around the time I started talking to John about this sort of thing, that, you were right on one level, that if I had a community that I felt comfortable with, my spiritual path would have been different.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. But I'm not so sure that the way that I retreated and then came back around very slowly and gradually at a way, with the kind of somewhat autonomy of my own and my philosophical explorations of all of these things. I'm not so sure it was a loss or a pathological thing. I think it was organismically kind of a gestalt thing that happened to me for a variety of good reasons. One more little tidbit. In one of my deep meditation experiences, It was a trance. It was like a vision. But even that word is not appropriate. I was in this kind of space where it felt like I really felt like I was inside the mind of God,
Mhm.
like Plato's form, all pure ideas, and everything was intelligible. I had this deep, non conceptual understanding. And when I came out of it, I remember thinking, I don't know how to even express that. But I felt almost like a message from divinity to me
Mhm.
that my job in this life was to learn philosophy so that I could talk about these things.
Hmm.
And I remember almost feeling like this was a command given to me that I resisted. I didn't
Hmm.
want to do that, but I didn't want to ignore it. So I went to the local college, which was Brooklyn College, and I went to the philosophy section in the bookstore, and I was looking at the books to see what is this philosophy. I had a very, limited conception of it. My father happened to have some kind of, it was like an encyclopedia of philosophy, this one old book about the size of a Bible with hundreds of philosophers in there, and I never understood any of it when I would read it. And he used to try to encourage me to read it. I was like, I don't get it, Dad. So when I went and looked in the books, I was like, this is all dry, logical analysis, empiricism, all the, like analytic philosophy was pretty much the norm in Western colleges, philosophy departments. And I was like, this is dry. It has nothing to do with those experiences that I had. I'm not going to do it. And I went for 8 years between high school and college before going back to college. I wound up by accident, serendipity, thinking, okay, I've got to do something with my life. I had blue collar jobs, driving tractor trailers and things like that. I had all kinds of jobs. But like I thought, I'm not going anywhere. I have a brain. I have to do something with my life. And I thought, well, computers was really interesting. And I thought cognitive science and computers, maybe there'll be an interface. We could read what the brain's doing, all this kind of stuff. And I went to college, but I hadn't done math in like 10 years because I didn't do math in the last 2 years of high school. I did foreign languages. You had options. And like I passed the math entrance exams, but you needed a lot of math for computer science. So my first math class that I took, which was the next level, it was so hard for me. I was spending 3 hours a night just to do like three problems. I had to keep looking up in my old high school algebra book. I didn't remember formulas, and it used to come totally naturally to me, but I just didn't use that muscle. So I thought, you have to love what you do, but you have to be good at it. So this isn't for me. But I loved my philosophy class. So yeah, yeah. So my life took a different turn, and I wound up here I am as a philosopher. And the funny thing is, I majored in philosophy, but the attitude among philosophers towards religion is very, very, most of them, at least in the ones who teach in the colleges,
Right.
dismissive.
Yeah.
Religions aren't really philosophies. They're more like ways of life. They're belief systems.
Yeah.
There's a saying that philosophers use to try to make themselves seem smarter than religionists, and it goes something like this. Religion is a set of answers that shouldn't be questioned, and philosophy is a set of questions that can't be answered, right?
That's very kind. That's very kind.
But I never got, answers to any of my deeper questions in philosophy anyway. But I did get a lot of conceptual, linguistic, rational tools from philosophy so that I can at least try to articulate and reason and examine and inquire on my own. And it's an ongoing thing for me. I'm just beginning to realize that I said about institutions that, growing up as a hippie age kid, forget institutions, let's do everything new. But now, as people say, when you get a little older and wiser, now you realize there needs to be a balance. You need to have hierarchy. Competence hierarchies, as Jordan says, are good things, but you need to have, the prophets yelling about that and all that kind of thing. So, like, I've come around. But I've always hoped that there's a name. What's his name? Uh,
Rupert Sheldrake?
yeah, that's the guy. I think that's his name. Who talks about anatheism? Have you heard him?
I haven't heard him on anatheism.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a neologism of his, but what he means by it is when you reach a certain level of spiritual exploration outside the religion you gave up, for those of us who did, it might be wise to go back and revisit your original religion.
Hmm.
Not necessarily in a nostalgic way of trying
Right.
to believe myths that you don't no longer believe, but to just try to, re-embody your original faith. So I try to do that. I'm open-minded, but it's an ongoing exploration for me.
Well, I
But hey,
noted.
helpful if I talk to you about that because you're the man.
Well, I'm not Roman Catholic, and it was, but
Well,
your story very much helps me because when I listened to you, I thought, this guy's not been away from. I have a friend who stops in here often. He's Sikh, and he's a young man, and he's just really getting into his Sikh religion now and studying it and everything. And so he listens to my channel, and so we're often comparing notes, and we have wonderful conversations. And but I listened to you, and I thought there's some church back there because it gets in. I mean, if you're raised in it, it comes in under the radar. It's part of the formation, and it doesn't go away. Well, let's so also in terms of, I noticed with the philosophy, I mean, you on one hand, have, a degree, a vocation, a career within formal academic philosophy. But of course, philosophy, there's, I think, a greater recognition now, and John certainly has been helpful in bringing this up. Philosophy to the Greeks was probably closer to something that a secular person might look at and say, well, that's kind of a religion, than where we see philosophy today.
oh yeah.
So where is that for you right now? I mean, where is your philosophy and your spirituality? How do they relate to each other?
Yeah. Yeah, this is an ongoing rediscovery for me because what attracted me to philosophy originally was just what was the first thing that I read in college? It was Plato's Apology and two snippets from the Republic, which was the line and the cave. I don't know if you know about the line metaphor, but the cave. And so reading about Plato's forms, Socrates as a character, that seemed like he's like a sage, so
Yeah.
or a prophet. He really was like kind of holy man. He believed that he had a divine sign, and he'd stand there in trances. And his own teacher was Diotima, who was some kind of
Hmm.
like a mystery cult leader. So there's all that stuff. But then once I majored in it, like John says, academic philosophy just kind of took a turn after some emperor shut down Plato's Academy around the 5th century or so. You had people like Maimonides and whatever. There have been certainly people throughout who are religious and philosophical. But, in the modern era, with the Enlightenment, most philosophy it's not a way of life, right? So, just like psychology is not a way of life. It's just like an academic subject. Therapists who have clients, full book of practices, they don't go home and live a psychological mode of life, right? Right. And most philosophers don't either. They teach, they grade papers, they go to conferences, they debate, they write, they have to publish and all that. It's a nice thing. It's like being a mathematician who's just taken by abstract, pure math, not engineering math, right? Or like theoretical physics, not science,
Applied physics.
applied, right? Yeah. So philosophy is most of it's that, So it's just a kind of interest, like being interested in chess or something, for most philosophers. Not that they're not trying to solve some interesting and important problems or map things out, and it's kind of like being an artist on one level artists like to make paintings, and philosophers, academic philosophers, like to make arguments and theories and all that, and and play them off of each other and all. So I got sucked into all of that because you have to become good at that to succeed in that world. But throughout the entire journey for me, I felt that there was philosophy's missing something, and it's missing this other aspect. That's why I really love meeting John, because John is connected with a bunch of philosophers who are living philosophy as a way of life, and they're developing these other practices that really embody the spirit of philosophy that Socrates and all these other dudes, I believe that they really were not logic crunching geeks like most academic philosophers are nowadays. But so only after I finally got my PhD, got my tenure, and then like, did I start to be able to feel like, okay, I myself can start doing philosophical research on things that really interest me as a human being, which is free will, meditation, Buddhism, all that kind of stuff. So, and it's all just starting to come into integration in me. It's that part of it has always been missing for me.
Yeah.
Private interest of mine. I mean, I've had a meditation practice, a yoga practice, all that kind of stuff. I had my, journaling. I've been living like kind of by myself as a philosopher who lives their philosophy because of these other spiritual practices of mine. But it hasn't completely, actually, what happened to me, ironically, if you remember now, it's like a divinity told me you need to learn philosophy so that you could explain this divinity experience that you just had. But the philosophy was almost like a Trojan horse that a virus got into me, which is this super skepticism about all things spiritual, right? So once I was exposed to these really brilliant philosophers who just cut anything in half that you don't have evidence for, concrete scientific evidence for, there's been a schism in my own psyche because I kind of took all that philosophical training in, but I've got this other side, like, thank God, literally, that I've been inoculated, but it's almost like the COVID inoculation. It's not that good, right? It's not that good. And because like I still got COVID, and no, because I say, I have friends who were in that original spiritual community with me, who are still in one or another of those three spiritual teachers' communities, even though the teachers have all died, who've been meditating and practicing the teachings, that like they never left. They just went with this teacher. There were three teachers. Some went with one, the other, or the other. Right? So the ones who were with Hilda, they're still in a little ashram land that she has upstate, this whole big estate, and they're living there. And some of them say they've never had a real spiritual experience, right? They've been practicing. So this is the kind of thing like, and I think, well, I had all those. If I took all my experiences like playing cards and doled one out to each of them, they would all be like half enlightened or something, or at least that's what they think. Like they think they're missing something because they didn't have those experiences. And I know, well, they didn't enlighten me. They had an impact on me, a huge impact on me. And I've heard people claim, I don't know if John Hick is one of them, but I've heard some pretty respectable philosophers of religion or mystics claim that if you've ever had one of these authentic experiences, you could never doubt it. Right? But philosophy has led me to be able to doubt every single one of my experiences. That's why I said it's like a Trojan horse. So I don't know if this was a blessing, a command, or a punishment that said, go learn philosophy. Because it's like a schism in me. Part of me, the larger part of me, like you said, I was raised a Christian. The larger part of me wants to believe and does believe, but I'm also always struggling with, well, you might believe that, but, all the people who are your respected colleagues and peers, the standard that you've accepted with them, whenever you argue with them, it's where does the argument lead? What's the best argument for that conclusion? And if you don't have the best one, the burden's on you. This kind of thing, Occam's razor and all these things. And it's like, I struggle, philosophy and faith. I struggle. And I remember early on in my philosophical career, one of my sweet professors, Stanley Malinovich, very sweet man. I don't remember, we was in ethics class, and I forget how it came up, but I remember him asking us, forget the curriculum. He said, but do you guys think, it was a small class, maybe 8 of us in there, because it was a high level ethical theory class, only philosophy majors were in it. Do you think philosophical inquiry undermines your faith? And everybody in the class said yes, except me. I said, no. I think the philosophical tools, I can use them to support my faith. That was how I started out, because that's why I wound up in philosophy. That's what I thought I was supposed to do. But it had this weird effect on me. But then I keep thinking, okay, if I can conquer that, then the mission was worth it.
Wow.
And so part of what I think my calling or my purpose is to try to be able to be somebody like John Hick or some other philosopher who makes a coherent case for something better, something deeper, something else, where other people who are on the fence and they go, I wasn't sure if I was entitled to believe that, if that irrational, but Rick Repetti's argument helped me. That's one of my motivations, to help other people who are where I've been, and I'm still there, really. So that's me being completely honest. I call myself semi-agnostic, which implies that I'm semi-gnostic, because all those experiences that I have, I would count them as Gnostic type experiences.
Absolutely.
I mean, when I was inside them, I was absolutely certain that I was in touch immediately with a deeper reality.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about losing the church or losing a container and all. On one level, yes, but on another level, no. I had like total faith when I turned around. The metaphor that I like to use is almost like I knew I had to dive back into the world. It was like diving into a lake of mud. I might go down into hell, but I have a pure soul, and I'm going to come back up the right way at the right time because I have faith in the universe. I mean, I really felt that. And when I was having that dark night of the soul, Paul, I mean, at night, I'm embarrassed to say this publicly because sometimes people will think, well, you must be nuts. I used to have respect for you, Rick, but you really believe things like that? But I mean, every night when I was going through that dark night of the soul, I was battling demons all night long in my sleep.
Yeah.
I had like an archangel come rescue me once in one of my dreams. Those were real things. They were more real than my embodied daily existence at the time.
Yep. Yep. That doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all.
No, I really thought if I don't turn around, I'm going to start having the stigmata, and I didn't want that life.
Yeah.
I felt like I'm being called to do something. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the life for me. I'm 19. I don't have a girlfriend.
Lord, make me celibate, just not yet.
Not yet. Make me chaste. Sort of soon.
Wow.
Yeah.
So many things. I want to mention, John, I know bought the book, and I think he only read a couple chapters of it. It's just a small book, C.S. Lewis's Miracles.
I heard you talk about it.
Yeah, that book has been.
I have to read that. Yeah, after what I heard you say about it.
Well, I guess I'm gonna get way late on how many you said so many things, and there's so many points I want to touch on. But that book for me, I mean, part of the reason I found Peterson interesting, I didn't know about Jung or anything like this, and so he just kind of comes on the scene, and it's like, wait a minute. I had a full realization that on one hand, when I'm preaching the Bible, I'm talking to people about, let's say, the story of Genesis, where ancient Near East cosmology, you have a dome, you've got pillars, you've got, but everybody in the church listening to me has a sun and then the earth, and and it's like, how on earth do these two worlds relate to one another? And I dealt with that, always dealing with that, and it was Lewis who, um, Lewis is in many ways, I think, a predecessor. There've been lots of meaning crises over the centuries, but Lewis was very much an early 20th century one. He had went to the First World War, got exactly the right kind of injury, where he survived the war because he sat out most of the war in a hospital, and then went to teach at Oxford, Cambridge, with this new discipline called English. And it's like, why is that a new discipline? And of course, had met Tolkien and a couple of Tolkien's friends, and began to believe that Christianity was the true myth, and that, unlike all of these other dying and resurrecting gods, Jesus was one in history who died and was resurrected, and all of this stuff. And so Lewis, of course, has been a really big deal in a bunch of Christian communities. But I, in the midst of all sorts of things, just always feeling the pull of sort of the secularist, materialist perspective. And so I would read C.S. Lewis's Miracles 2 or 3 times a year, just to sort of, wait a minute, is, I needed that for some part of me. And so for me, the question of reason and what is it? I mean, for Lewis, in Miracles, reason is like one of these minor miracles, in that it's just this little gift of grace that allows human beings to sort of every now and then ascend from, the maelstrom we live within. And when you mentioned, philosophy, the one with the best argument, it's even a strange thing to ask. Well, what is it that makes each of us listen to this one argument and say, oh, that's a good argument, and then to have a group of people listen to that argument and say, well, that's the best argument, when you've got this other group of people over there and looking at it, say, no, that's not the best argument. It's not just math, although it's not disconnected from math, but it's not just math. There's a weird thing to us with all of this supposed rationality and objectivity, that at some point you look at it and you just say, nah, that's not all that's going on here.
Yeah. Well, John's made this very clear point about the 4 P's: propositional, perspectival, procedural, and participatory. And the philosophy that I was raised in and trained in is all the first one, propositional.
Yeah.
Premises and conclusions and logic, and what's the evidence for the premises, and that's, and that is somewhat mathematical, but you're right. Whether or not a premise is plausible, and John makes a big deal about plausibility in his 50 some odd lecture Meaning Crisis series, plausibility is really important. It's not, we can't really prove hardly that much, so it's more about what's plausible. Whether or not something's plausible to you depends on what your participatory and procedural and whatever the third one was. Sometimes, all of that stuff,
So that was one piece. Another piece was, I don't have the major book here, but it's, swinging back through the institutional question. It's difficult for most of us to realize that 150 years ago, the discussions in philosophy in American academic settings would have been radically different from what they are today on exactly the points you just described. So one of my teachers at Calvin College, George Marsden, this is one of the minor books. It's not his major book on the academy, but this massive transformation that happens at the end of the 19th century, whereby you enter the 19th century where Harvard, Yale, Amherst, Brown, these are all, Princeton, these are all religious institutions founded for the training of clergy, who are in many ways sort of competing with each other. They're battling with each other over Protestant confessional orthodoxies back and forth, that, you know, by the beginning of the 20th century and well into the middle of the 20th century, they all sort of become homogenous in this other project, which has nothing to do with what they were about 100 years before. And that's a major transformation that touches on this question of institutions and spirituality, where suddenly all of that has to go away because we have this other project, which is all about propositional truth, that is the main project. And sure, we'll have all our internecine rivalries back and forth between academics, but for the most part, all of the big institutions, unless they're these Catholic or Christian or these religious institutions, all of these institutions are doing the same thing. And again, it's been interesting watching, you know, we will have to see how much longer that game will go. It's not at all certain. So then to kind of swing back to
kind of science envy, I would say.
Oh, well, and that hit theology in a huge way in the 19th century as well, especially Protestant theology. I mean, all the Protestants wanted to do was turn their theology into a science. And basically by, you know, the middle to the end of the 20th century, it's all abandoned. It's completely abandoned. And many of the divinity schools that are still connected to some of these Ivy League schools, I mean, they're just either they're kind of swept up in the religion of activism today, you know, post 60s, or I mean, you leave Yale Law School with a law degree, or you leave Yale Divinity School with a divinity degree. Your expected employment prospects from those two schools can hardly be more dissimilar. So I have my son's girlfriend, you know, has a law degree from Yale Law, and you know, you leave that institution and the doors just fling open.
Yeah.
Yale Divinity? Well, oh, that's nice. What are you gonna do with that? You know, find some mainline church with a fat endowment. That's about your only prospect. So, you know, so part of this, so, you know, your story is so interesting because the desire to have philosophy once again be recognized as a conversation that impacts and alters a lifestyle. I mean, all this, I mean, have you ever heard the name Dallas Willard?
No.
Okay. Dallas Willard was a phenomenologist, taught at USC in Southern California, died several years ago. Very interesting guy. He was one of the few sort of top tier American philosophical academics who also became a leader of a Christian movement, which was all about spiritual practices, and a very, very, very interesting guy. But, you know, he, in some of his books, you know, he wrestled with these questions because, you know, for him, when he read, I mean, it was only after rereading Dallas Willard, I don't know how many times, that I finally decided I was going to open up Plato's Republic in Greek. You know, I'd learned Greek as part of my New Testament formation as a minister, but it's only after reading Dallas Willard a number of times that it ever occurred to me, I should open up Plato in Greek. And what does Plato read like in Greek when I'm used to reading the New Testament? And it's like, oh, wait a minute. You know, it's a big conversation how conversant, maybe how much Jesus knew of Plato as a big conversation. But certainly a few generations hence, with church fathers, you very much have people who are reading Jesus and are reading Plato. And that, of course, will come then into the Greek fathers and on and on and on and on and on. So,
well, they all spoke Greek too, didn't they?
Yeah.
That was like English at the time.
Yeah. Well, it was the common language. Well, Aramaic, of course, in the Persian Empire was, so Jesus likely spoke Aramaic, but chances are, all these academic debates, of course.
Curious, when Jesus spoke with Pilate, what language did they speak? Do you know?
My guess would be Greek.
Koine, yeah.
Yeah. That would be my guess.
Yeah, me too.
So, even though I can very much imagine that your interests and John's interest at this moment might feel on the fringes of the academy, a little bit of historical perspective suggests that the anomaly might in fact be what is at the center of the academy now.
Say more about that.
Well,
interesting.
Of course, John did a conversation with a couple of people about, universities, where the universities in the West. Luther, of course, was an Augustinian monk who was also a lecturer at the Wittenberg, university that his patron was trying to beef up. They also had one of the best collections of relics in Europe. It's one of the ironies of the Protestant Reformation. And the universities were, in many ways, in Protestantism, sort of became a replacement for the monasteries. So the monasteries, so in the Protestant Reformation, some of the divorce, monasteries sort of both became the nuclear family and also universities. And so, almost all of the universities, the older universities in America, they're all founded by sectarian Protestant organizations until, of course, the Catholics come, and they're a lot later in American history. Well, there's not a lot later because there's just not a lot of American history, but they're later to come, and they've really, of course, taken on. They were able in some ways to transplant a lot of their gravitas to America, which really gave them a boost. But that's the majority story in terms of the university, and this modernity and the analytics and the fetishism over propositionalism. That really only got going in the 19th century. And it looks to me like we're beginning to see the end of it. It's playing out. And so, looking at a historical perspective, where this will likely land will be something, probably a return to the longer pattern, which would be that universities pursue truth within a religious container. That seems to me, but see, the idea of secularism has always been secularism is going to sweep away religion, because of course religion itself, that entire framework, is all a framework of this modernist period. But just looking at the way things are going now, no, I think the modernism is going to get swept away, and the secularism is going to be eventually continue to sort of lose its grip. The terrifying thing is that secularism afforded sort of a koine atmosphere whereby sectarians who previously drew each other's blood could have arguments and leave and go home and have common systems. And we're seeing this you see this breakdown in the rise of Islamism. I was talking to my Sikh friend about India, renewed persecution of Sikhs and Christians. You see this in various Christian realms as well. So rise of certain fundamentalisms that can get violent. So, there's a lot, even though the Orthodox and some Catholics would say, hooray for the end of liberalism. I'm a little bit more sober because with liberalism and secularism, we also had a fair amount of ending of bloodshed. And that's not a bad thing. So when I look at your, when I listen to you talk and I look at John's project, I think in those terms. And so I really do think that you and John are actually, you're much more to the norm of the far longer project of philosophy. And of course, now cognitive science is a new thing. And that, you're, the future is bright, even if we have a lot of really scary questions about what the future will look like.
Yeah. One of them is about this secular religion of wokeism, which is taking over the universities.
And that's part of the reason. And I think that's a sign of the decline of the secular. And postmodernity sort of began to undermine the secular. And so when you see, let's say, in many ways, Jordan Peterson, the IDW types were sort of those who sort of stood up, and they're Peterson's a weird guy because he's both a modernist and he's, it's because that Jung thing sort of goes different ways. But
he's hard to classify.
Yeah. But the big pushback against wokeism in many cases is let's preserve modernity. But there's no going back. There's never a going back. And that's, of course, something that the Orthodox and the Catholics always have to deal with. There's never going back purely because you can't unsee everything that has come. And so wokeism is just a sign that, yeah, if you don't have a religious foundation, you're going to have a hard time having a degree of stability and continuity over multiple generations. And part of, especially in America, we don't think in terms of lineages. Older civilizations do that. Asian civilizations do that. The Catholic Church does that. These are very old institutions that are always thinking, 5 generations down the road after me. Today, it's like, I want my best life now. It's like, that's your people will never endure if you think that way.
Yeah. Yeah. You make an awful lot of sense, Paul. Which makes me, like I said earlier, I've come around to respecting the importance of institutions, but I'm not quite sure which institutions I can throw my support behind completely.
Well, you're not and that's part of my estuary thing is exactly about that, because so a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people now who are basically like, what you just described, that they're so thoroughly disenchanted. Part of them just hungers for a spiritual experience. And so, okay, well, you're going to go play with psychedelics and you'll have your experience, but that's not enough. One of the key things we're wrestling with is, okay, well, now we've got all this technology, we've got this power, we've got this affluence. Well, what exactly do we want? What will finally satisfy us? And of course, in an Augustinian tradition, we will say, God. And that sounds like a trite answer, and on many lips it is, but it isn't. But yet, what exactly does that mean for those of us who are, continued to be wrapped in skin? And maybe if we have in clock time, a few minutes, hours, or even days, but in mental space seems like eternity, we come down. And then there's bathing and eating and talking and bill paying, and so what are we looking for, and can we ever get there? I mean, those are the enduring fundamental questions.
Yeah.
And those questions go all over the world.
Yeah. Socrates' main question, I think, is summarized sometimes as how should I live, or how should one live?
Yeah, yeah.
Depending on.
So I don't know if any of that was helpful or.
Yes, it was all very helpful. I very much enjoy our conversation.
Well, shall we land the plane here, or what would you like to do? I've got about a half hour left if you want to use it, or we can land the plane here, and I can do a little bit of editing and send something to you, and you can say, yeah, that'd be okay to share, or you can say, no, let's just keep it to ourselves, or let's just send it to John, or I mean, you can do any of those things.
Yeah, no, I think everything, once we shifted gears from the personal stuff, is fine. I'm fine with that. But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I hope this was worth your time.
Oh, it absolutely was. I hope it was worth yours.
Oh no, I love it. I can't get enough of this kind of thing. So, which is why I'm in the profession I am, I suppose.
You know what? Before you go, I've heard you mention and discuss occasionally the estuary, but I never looked it up. So tell me about that. What is that?
I have for almost 25 years been the minister of a little church on a seedy little corner in not the most important city in America, sharing my life and giving my life to a lot of older people who never watch any of my videos, would have very little idea of a lot of what we spoke about in this conversation. Never think about Plato or Socrates or any of these things. And at the same time, have always wanted to have conversations like these. When Jordan Peterson came around, I made my first video. Suddenly, my buddy Rick stops in church the first Sunday after I make my video, gives me this poster and says, I've never been to church before in my life, but here I am. And for the next couple of years after church, I say, well, what'd you think of this, Rick? He says, I have no idea what's going on with you people. It's inconceivable what's going on here. But after a month or so of making videos, Rick and some of my friends said, well, why don't you do a meetup? And so Jordan Peterson meetup. I thought, nobody's going to come to this. Dozen people come. And what am I going to do with these people? I don't know. We're just going to sit down and talk. So we talked for about 2 hours, and then we keep talking. In fact, we talk so long that it's 1:30 in the morning and the church phone rings. And I thought, I know who that is. That's my wife. Who are these people you're with? So at that point, it was like, okay, I need to have an end time. So then we would do it the next month, and we just have a conversation. We do it the next month. One of the things that I realized in how many years of church work is that very few people would imagine, just like that woman who knocked on the door here, I need some gas money, or I need some food, or I need $20 because I really need some beer, or, whatever they knock on my door for. Nobody would ever knock on the door and thinking, I'd really like to have a good conversation with someone about what's important.
Yeah.
And so I also noticed in running a lot of Bible studies in church that, just like you mentioned before, in terms of you're a little kid and you have a question and you got these, one baby goes to heaven and one baby goes to limbo, say, well, what about that? And, don't ask questions like that in church. We have orthodoxy to maintain. Oh, okay. Well, I certainly don't want to mess up your orthodoxy. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. But I noticed that even in wonderful, well-meaning Bible studies, that people would not say what they really thought. And they'd certainly not tell their pastor, because they'd lose status in the community. Well, maybe they're no longer believing like the rest of us are supposed to. But the more I would talk to people privately, I realized that there's whole ranges of beliefs that people have and don't have that they won't fess up to. Not to mention the other stuff going on in their lives that they know they shouldn't be doing that is really going on. And on one hand, in a community like that, you sort of need those kinds of tensions and boundaries and expectations. I get all that. But without a space in which to process and explore, people just sort of hold their breath for as long as they can and then get out the door and, now I can go do whatever I think I should do, whether it means I don't believe in Jesus, or I want to, leave my wife, or I want to go say Socrates is great and Jesus is meh. I mean, you can't say that in church. So I get the idea of having a space outside of church, but it's often inside the building of church, because that's the space I got, where people can talk and they can say what they think, and we can listen to each other. And we have this little protocol that tries to help keep the small group dynamics good, so nobody hogs the conversation and you don't wind up spending 2 hours talking about what nobody else in the group wants to listen to, or any of that kind of stuff. So we have a few little rules about that, but basically the purpose of it is, let's have a space where people can talk and tell their truth and form a community together somewhat. And I think actually it doesn't have to be in a church or connected to a church, but in my opinion, churches need this, because right now, by virtue of everything that's gone on in the culture and also the internet and everything, there's a lot of people who are just sort of wandering out of church. And as a pastor, the pastor's often the last to know. And as a pastor, it's kind of like, I wish you'd come and talk to me, because I'm not necessarily hurt that you're leaving the church. I'm more hurt that you didn't feel you had anyone that you could talk to about these things. And I wind up being the pastor for lots of people who will never go to church. Just happens that way in a neighborhood. And that's, I'm fine with that. Even if I'd love for them to come to church, I will love them and listen to them, and I will be their pastor and I'll be their friend, even if they never come to church. It's totally cool. I get that. But what Estuary is supposed to do is to say, here's a space. Nobody's going to try to evangelize you. Nobody's going to ask you for money. Nobody's going to lean on you and try and make you believe something that you don't believe. But why don't you tell us what you really think, and be willing to listen to what other people really think? In some ways, it's exactly what we've done just in this little conversation, but with maybe a group of 4, 6, or 8 people. And then you do it with some regularity, because, after we know each other's stories a little bit, now the next time we come to the conversation, we don't start from zero.
You've got some friendship, you've got some mutual understanding, there's trust growing. It's a reciprocal opening, as John might call it.
Exactly.
Well, that's awesome. So you've been doing that for a long time?
No, so the group here said, this is great, we ought to share it with people. And so we've been sort of trying to help other groups start. There's a friend of mine who was very much on the ground floor of this. He sort of runs a training thing that has about 50 people. And the training thing is just doing it. It's not unlike yoga, and it's just doing it together with some repetition. But then their job is to, start their own groups. And so we've got that going. So
it's kind of like a movement, like a pyramid. It's spreading out.
Yeah.
That's good. So you do it physically, not online?
The goal is for people to do it physically. Sometimes, especially during COVID, some groups moved online. We're going to continue. We're still exploring the online physical thing. The priority, though, should be the physical, because when things happen in the physical space, they're much richer, more enduring, they're more real.
And then people are living in the same community too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anonymity online, people
Yeah.
from everywhere.
And so, my group has a lot of atheists, ironically enough. But yeah, we can help each other when someone has a crisis. They've got a pastor if they want one,
That's great. What a great idea.
So, yeah, that's Estuary.
That's great. So how many groups do you think are out there doing that already? About
Well, right now, there's about a dozen that are active right now, and
Wow.
we've got about 50. So I'm going to Europe at the end of the summer because we've got a group in Germany. They're doing a little festival. And so I'm going to travel around. The little bit of celebrity I have from my channel, sort of leverage that, and people can decide if they want to have something that's more of an ongoing basis. So
Very good. Good work you're doing, Paul. Good luck with it.
thanks.
Really great meeting you.
Oh, it's great meeting you. I so enjoyed your stories and getting to know you. And
Likewise.
we'll have to do this again. Maybe we'll rope John in. Maybe me, you, and John will have a conversation together. That could be fun.
Sure. On one of the episodes that I had with him, after I saw those things where you were talking about me, John and I talked a little bit about your interpretation of my experiences. I don't know if you saw that one.
No, I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was. Oh, I'll send you the link for it. I know which
Okay.
one it is.
Okay.
As soon as we get off.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, so he's interested. He had some of his own. He told me that he's been kind of like debating with you about the container issue, that religion without a religion might not be so, long term lasting because it's lacking something and all that. So he's definitely, as you already know, he's interested in this topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
And
that would be fun. The three of us.
and we're going to, I'm finally going to get to meet him next September. We have a big thing going up in Thunder Bay with Peugeot. So that's going to be a good time. And that's going to be a lot of the people who've been sort of talking on the internet for 4 years, getting into one physical space and hopefully having more conversations. So
It's great. All right, Paul. Wow.
all right, Rick, this was a treat.
Yeah, likewise. Totally wonderful. Thank you, man.
All right.
We'll
We will speak again.
Yeah. Take care, man.
Bye-bye.